Second reading of the Local Government Act 1986 Amendment Bill, the Earl of Halsbury.
My Lords, I beg to move that this bill be now read a second time. In so moving, I would like your Lordship's leave to read the terms of what I moved nearly 10 years ago on the 14th of June 1977 against the late Lord Arran's bill reducing the age of homosexual consent from 21 to 18. What I then moved was that, I quote, in view of the growth in activities of groups and individuals exploiting male prostitution and its attendant corruption of youth, debasement of morals and spread of venereal disease, this House declines to give the bill a second reading. That motion was carried by a majority of 152 to 25 and had the very substantial support of the whole House. What I then said of homosexuality was this: given any disability whatever, one has the alternatives of either making the best or the worst of the situation in which one finds oneself. Homosexuals have this choice. It is as open to them as to anyone else. Those who make the best of their situation are the responsible ones, who would no more molest little boys than a responsible heterosexual would molest little girls, or go down the streets soliciting strangers, or reject stabilized relations for promiscuity. The law does not concern itself with them, and nor do I. Those who make the worst of their situation are the sick ones, who suffer from a psychological syndrome whose symptoms are the following. First of all, exhibitionism. They want the world to know all about them. Secondly, promiscuity. Thirdly, proselytizing. They want to persuade other people that their way of life is a good one. Fourthly, boasting of homosexual achievements, as if they were due to and not in spite of sexual inversion. And lastly, they act as reservoirs of venereal diseases of all kinds. Ask any venereologist. Syphilis, gonorrhea, genital herpes, and now AIDS are characteristically infections of homosexuals. I was referring, of course, to male homosexuals. I did not think then that lesbians were a problem. They do not molest little girls. They do not indulge in disgusting and unnatural practices like buggery. They are not wildly promiscuous and do not spread venereal disease. It is part of the softening up propaganda that lesbians and gays are nearly always referred to in that order. The relatively harmless lesbian leads on to the vicious gay. That was what I thought then, and what I still in part continue to think, but I have been warned that the loony left is hardening up the lesbian camp and that they are becoming increasingly aggressive. My Lords, one of the characteristics of our time is that we have for several decades past been emancipating minorities who claimed that they were disadvantaged. Are they grateful? Not a bit. We emancipated races and got inverse racism. We emancipate homosexuals and they condemn heterosexism as chauvinist sexism, male oppression, and so on. They will push us off the pavement if we give them a chance. I am, in their jargon, a homophobe, a heterosexist exploitationist. The whole vocabulary of the loony left is let loose in a wild confusion of Marxism, Trotskyism, anarchism, and homosexual terminology. I have files and files of it, with which I shall not weary your lordships. The coffee table glossy, Changing the World, produced by Ilya, is said to be a charter of gay and lesbian rights, as they are claimed. I have put this and other material in the library for all to see and study. It really does not bear quotation in your lordship's house. I'm not going to make a long speech in commending this bill to your lordships. It is too short a bill to need one. I'm greatly obliged to my friend, the noble Lord Campbell of Alloway, for help in drafting it. It has only one main clause with 4 subsections. The first subsection prevents a local authority from giving financial or other assistance to any person for the purpose of publishing or promoting homosexuality as an acceptable family relationship, or for the purpose of teaching such acceptability in any maintained school. The words other assistance would of course include providing local authority premises for a guest speaker, and that would be forbidden. The second subsection declares that a breach of the first is justiciable in the civil courts. The third identifies the class of persons who may institute proceedings under the second and gives them locus standi. And the fourth merely excuses a local authority for deliberate disobedience to its instructions by its employees. There then follows the short title and scope of jurisdiction. It doesn't apply to Northern Ireland. My Lords, I have had overwhelming support for this bill from all over the country, and a very good press. I believe I shall have it this afternoon in your Lordship's house, to judge by the number and quality of the speakers who have put their names down and to whom I am greatly obliged. Only 2 dissentient voices have been raised against it. One is, surprise, surprise, the Right Reverend Primate, the Archbishop of York, who feels it a further incursion of centralism into our educational system. The other is that of a Professor Peter Campbell, chairman of the Conservative Group for Homosexual Equality. He takes the exact opposite view to the Right Reverend Primate and thinks we need more centralism in our educational system, not less, but thinks it unfair to start with homosexuals. Well, as Mandy Rice Davis once said on a celebrated occasion, he would say that, wouldn't he? My Lords, I cannot put the world to rights single-handed, but I can locate a specific mischief and begin there, as I'm doing this afternoon, with one of the worst mischiefs corrupting the fibre of our children and ultimately of our society itself, because they are its future. So I shall leave the Right Reverend Primate and Professor Campbell to settle the question of centralism versus decentralism between them, and say no more at this stage. The hour is late. Lots of other speakers are waiting to speak. My Lords, I beg to move.
My Lords, it was typically kind, of the noble Earl to acknowledge the paternity of this bill, but courageous to have adopted it as his own, so as to give it all the best possible start in life and all the advantages which only the noble Earl could confer. A prologue of persuasive clarity, which is such as to stamp the order of our debate with the hallmark of his own sincerity of purpose. An exposition, a masterly exposition of the part of the measure of misconception that permeates the anathema ex cathedra of the most reverend primate, the Archbishop of York, and a reasoned resolution to some of the objections of Professor Campbell. My Lords, this is an emotive subject, but the case for the bill rests solely upon reason. It is a very limited bill in scope and in structure. It is not designed to harass or humiliate homosexuals. They're often sad and lonely people, unable to have stable relationships, and they are I'm sure all your lordships would agree, worthy of compassion. The provision of special services, welfare facilities by local authorities for these people is in no way inhibited by this bill. It's expressly limited to avoid this. The bill does not prohibit the appointment of a homosexual teacher. It in no way impinges upon sex education as ordinarily understood. It in no way derogates from any aspect of existing legislation. To take but two examples in the realm of the local authority. For example, the advertisements in Gay News for the lesbian and gay unit administration officer and other similar appointments would not fall within this prohibition. Another example, babysitters on the rates for lesbian mothers while they attend a conference. Neither the conference as such, nor the babysitters, the provision for them, would fall within this prohibition. Other noble lords, I'm anxious not to take too much time, will deal with matters which clearly lie within the prohibition, such as the promotion of lesbian and gay rights, as it is called, although what's gay about it is difficult to appreciate, as it is implemented in our schools. That would fall within the prohibition. Also, the provision of explicit books of certain types. On the floor of your lordship's house, it's wholly inappropriate to quote from some of them, which are made available to these children with contact addresses and also references to other similar books. Such books, once described by a police officer, I quote him, as a lure to pervert the young. And one of them, as I think your lordships will have seen from the papers, you've got a girl aged 5 in bed with 2 naked homosexuals, one of whom is said to be her father. Hence this lead to the acceptable family aspect which is being promoted. Of course, my lords, there'll be borderline cases. To give but one example of the borderline case to illustrate how the bill would work, the fostering facilities offered in one of these local authorities are such that they afford to homosexual couples of either sex fostering facilities for children of either sex on exactly the same basis as is afforded to heterosexual couples. Now that, on the facts of any particular case, and it would be, of course, a matter for the judge to decide on the evidence, could fall within the prohibition or could not. The plain and simple intendment of the bill is to curb an abuse of rates which is of particular concern to parents. For the promotion of homosexuality as this so-called family relationship as is implemented today, which is acceptable all too often in its presentation, has the presentation of what they call, quotes, positive images. And these positive images, as implemented as a matter of policy involve a direct attack on the heterosexual family life. As the noble Earl put it, pushing us off the pavement. They do it in various ways. Two ways that come to mind. One is they attack the paternalistic disciplines of an ordinary family as being totally wrong, because children should be totally free. And another is to teach the children that in some way the reproductive potential of the heterosexual relationship constitutes a positive social mischief in an overpopulated world. Now, my lords, in this age of tolerance, have we not rarely reached the intolerable, where parents seeking to protect their children from moral corruption are exposed to abuse, ridicule, threats of violence, and even visitations of violence? Parental rights are overtly denied and challenged. And what is more, the traditional ethos of local government has been traduced. Now, how to deal with it? Local government, as your lordships appreciate, is a creature of statute. So it's only by statute that it may be ordained what lies within the province of local government and how such ordinance may be enforced. We have no written constitution. Now, as matters stand, and I'm relieved to see the noble and learned Lord Denning in his place, as matters stand, it lies as a matter of law within the administrative discretion of the local authorities to pursue these very policies. A discretion which is not subject to judicial review unless there's bad faith, error as to limit of power, some substantial procedural irregularity, or unreasonableness verging upon absurdity. Hence the need for interventionist legislation and the justification for some type of enforcement, as is proposed by this bill. This, my lords, was recognized in the Widdicombe research papers. The role of local government was considered at volume 3, chapter 5, and at volume 4, page 109, reference is made in those papers to the proliferation of pressure groups at local level devoted to the achievement of particular goals, one of which, sexual behavior, is in point. And it is recommended in that research paper that in this and in other regards there is a need, quote, for adjustments to be made. So such is the case for interventionist legislation, which must be met by those who oppose the principle of the bill. It may well be that certain noble lords may entertain preconceptions about Ilia. I mention Ilia because they set up the 84 project, Relationship and Sexuality, and they put on a course in May 86 which included as one of its stated aims to develop materials, I'm quoting, presenting positive images of lesbian and gay men, end of quote. This, my lords, in the wake of the old GLC London Charter of 85 and the implementation of some of the 142 recommendations, in particular, tell it to the classroom and the kangaroo courts for teachers, could well fall within the prohibition. And now, as your lordships know from the papers, the Association of London Authorities, some 10 London local authorities, 3 elsewhere, all in densely populated areas. And indeed, those authorities, in fact, implement these policies. And one local authority alone has spent 180,000 promoting these positive images, I quote, from nursery school to further education. Now, my lords, taking into account the safeguard measures in the bill, which not only afford a defence, but could also effect dismissal and reinstatement, it will be for the civil courts to decide, in accordance with well-established procedures, whether to grant interim relief, whether a breach of prohibition has been made out on the evidence, on a substantive hearing, and in the very rare case, whether to award damage. Costs will be in the discretion of the court. The sanction for enforcement will be contempt. Officers and servants of the local authority may not be impleaded other than in the contempt proceedings. Enforcement, my lords, goes to the principle of the bill, but the proposed procedural machinery for implementation goes to drafting, which would ordinarily be resolved on consideration of amendments at committee stage. And in conclusion, my lords, may I just say this. It is common ground that children are exposed at this moment to corruptive influences as a matter of local government policy. It is common ground that the role of local government has been abused. And it is common ground that these manifestations of misconduct are not acceptable. So, my lords, may we not make common cause of our common concern, accept the principle of this bill, and give it a second reading.
My lords, I rise to support this bill following the telling speeches of the noble Earl and the noble Lord Campbell of Alloway. I do so from a conventional Christian point of view, and not one particularly Protestant or Roman Catholic, just Christian. And I hasten to say that I'm not speaking under the guidance of my political or spiritual masters or after consultation with anybody at all. I'm just speaking as my conscience tells me to speak. Any Christian, it seems to me, must approach the question of homosexuality with particular care. There's nothing that I can find about it in the Gospels, subject, of course, as always to any correction by the noble primate, but nothing, prelate, but nothing that I can find about in the Gospels. And what there is in St. Paul is undoubtedly quite firm, but isn't necessarily binding on all of us. When the Wolfenden report was published 30 years ago, I introduced a motion into this House in favour of it, at a time when no one in the House of Commons would touch it with a barge pole. I remember getting up to move that motion and just wondering, just as I rose to my feet, whether I was on the right side. Well, by that time it was a bit late to change, but I proceeded and along that line and still feel that I was on the right side. I spoke to the most distinguished of all law lords just afterwards. I haven't asked his permission quote this. I may or may not obtain it. But I spoke to the most distinguished of law lords afterwards, and who led the opposition to that bill, and congratulated him at least on his eloquence. And he said, and I'm glad he is still with us, I said, well, that he's been awfully eloquent. And he said, I only made up my mind at the last minute whether I was going to be for it or against it. So you can see that these are very delicate matters of conscience. I was called at that time by Lord Boothby, not then a member of this House, but Lord Boothby, who was interested in these matters, called me the non-playing captain of the homosexual team. I only mention that because I don't want anybody to think that I suffer from some sort of paranoia about homosexuals, male or female. I've addressed a number of societies in recent times, male homosexual societies and female homosexual societies, lesbian societies. If anyone is going in for that kind of talk, I think they'll have a better time with lesbian societies than male homosexual societies. That's just a matter of my experience. But at any rate, it's something very profitable to be derived from speaking to such bodies and arguing these matters out. When I wrote a book a few years ago about St. Francis of Assisi, I was told by a famous Franciscan that I must have a chapter about St. Francis and contemporary lepers. You may remember whenever St. Francis saw a leper, he went and kissed him. I suppose he would do the same about someone suffering from AIDS today, but I'm not going to dwell on that subject of AIDS at all, but it comes into my mind at this moment. I changed the chapter in the book to St. Francis and contemporary outcasts, and I dwelt briefly on a number of people who I regarded as outcasts. Of course, outcasts don't like being called outcasts always, but I did deal with the position of the mentally disturbed people, the blacks, homosexuals, and criminals. And I pleaded then, in all those cases, for much more compassion and understanding, and I would certainly say that homosexuals, particularly the kind of homosexuals referred to by Lord Halsbury, are high-minded people, but really for all homosexuals, because whether they're high-minded or low-minded, they deserve our compassion and understanding. Now today we are asked to support a bill which would prevent the promotion of what is called now a positive image of homosexuality by certain London boroughs. That means prevent the insistence in the growing propaganda of these boroughs that heterosexuality and homosexuality should be placed on precisely the same footing. And I'm bound to say that having studied some of this propaganda, which I quite agree with Lord Halsbury is very shocking and is not really suitable for the delicate ears of your lordships, but I quite agree with him about this particular propaganda. But of course the promotion of homosexuality goes hand in hand with a good deal of promotion of promiscuity of all kinds, aimed in quite a few cases at very young children. It is revolting stuff. I am not going to deal with two important aspects of this question. One, the extent to which central government should interfere with local government. That is perhaps for other speakers, but not for me today. And secondly, the responsibility which falls on the leaders of a great political party, in this case my own party, the Labour Party, for making sure that the moral ideals of the party are properly reflected at local level. It is very distressing for Labour people, honest, serious Labour people in these boroughs, to find that themselves being told that this propagation of active homosexuality is the Labour Party policy, which of course it is anything is far from being. And I leave that happily to the leaders from my own party and in this House and elsewhere. But I'm bound to say, when I hear these references to the loony left from the noble Earl, who I'm supporting, my mind goes back to the great school, what he now regarded as the greatest of schools, which we both attended, he rather later than me, but we were there. I think we overlapped. And I think from our experience of that grade school and other old public school boys present, we'll agree that in those days at least, homosexuality was not a perquisite of the left wing. And I think that is something to be borne in mind, lest old public school boys become a little bit self-righteous. Yes. Maybe ask, where did some of these leaders of the so-called loony lift, where did their ideas come from? And so I think everybody should just begin to wonder a little bit whether they're qualified to cast the first stone. All that, of course, by the way. Now, what I am concerned with is the simple issue, and it is a last very relevant issue today, especially in what we've just heard, and we'll hear more from we heard from the noble Earl and the noble Lord Campbell of what is going on. Can any country claiming to be Christian spend money, public money, on the active propagation of homosexual practices? And of course I'm not talking of homosexual attitudes. Everybody is aware that homosexual feelings are not sinful even by the strictest of Christian standards. We're talking of actual sexual relationships and behavior. And these are being promoted now in some areas as an alternative to fidelity in marriage and family life. And if one's asked whether that is any Christian country can hold up its head if it does allow its money to be spent on the promotion of such practices, there can only be one answer, which is, of course, a negative one. As I indicated earlier, I'm not going to bring age into this. It strengthens the argument, obviously. But I don't feel that it's necessary to bring in age in order to make out this case. I'd have said what I'm saying now before I'd ever heard of age. Homosexuals, in my submission, are handicapped people. They are, of course, you get some of them who are who don't confine themselves to relationships with their own sex. I suppose Oscar Wilde was one of the most famous examples of that. And I'm not referring to people who attempt to have it both ways, but I'm talking of people whose tendency is so strong that they can only have relationships with their own sex. And I'm thinking particularly of male homosexuals because, as I think Lord Halsbury brought out, lesbians are no danger. The tragedy, of course, of such people is that they cannot enjoy family life, they cannot have children. And if only for that reason, I suppose, or not many of us, perhaps none of us, would wish our children or our grandchildren to grow up homosexuals. But insofar as I think I indicated this earlier, but insofar as these people are handicapped, they deserve our fullest compassion and understanding. But insofar as an attempt is being made to expand homosexualism throughout this community, the outcome can only be fatally disruptive for the family. It is bound to be of profound concern to Christians and to everyone else who wishes to maintain a healthy community. My lords, I am not saying that the promotion of active homosexuality should necessarily be made illegal. That might or might not be discussed on some other occasion. I'm only saying that it should not be financed by public bodies in a country that still claims to be Christian. I offer my support to Lord Halsbury's bill.
My Lords, I would like to give the strongest possible support to my noble friend Lord Halsbury's bill. When I was first made aware of what was going on in certain of our schools by the noble Lord Campbell of Alloway, I was horrified. Before speaking today, I read some of the material which is being produced by some local authorities for the teaching of school children and for the training of teachers. I read extracts from Lesbian and Gay Youth magazine and from Changing the World a London Charter for gay and lesbian rights. I would like to draw your Lordship's attention to page 32, and I quote, "What exactly is heterosexuality and what causes it?" Then follow 9 different denigatory reasons, such as, in most cases of compulsive heterosexual behaviour, the parents will be found to have suffered from similar difficulties. And I think the noble Lord Campbell of Alloway has already referred to this, a terror of mortality lies beneath much heterosexual coupling, driven to perpetrate themselves at any cost. Most heterosexuals are indifferent to the prospect of the worldwide famine that will result if the present population explosion continues unchecked. And on page 9, we read, and I quote again, "Heterosexism is not only individual attitudes, it is an institutionalized system that openly promotes the attitude that heterosexuality and heterosexual family life is normal and natural." On page 18, under the heading, "Tell it in the classroom," we read, "There should be openly understood procedures for complaints by college students and school pupils and students about heterosexism, as about racism and sexism. Parents of lesbian and gay students should also be allowed to complain about heterosexism." And what will that lead to? It will lead to the setting up, it already has, I think, led to the setting up of kangaroo courts to examine teachers accused of heterosexism. And as for what will take place in those courts, my mind boggles when we hear, as I hope we will do, from the noble Baroness Lady Cox, what has happened to parents who protested at what their children were being taught. I think your Lordship's minds will boggle too. Finally, I looked through the playbook for kids about sex, and I hope that every one of your Lordships will do so too, because I cannot bring myself to quote from it. As a mother and a grandmother, I was more than horrified, I was appalled. I have said before in this House that I believe that corrupting children in any way is one of the worst crimes that anyone can commit, and I make no apology for repeating it again. I believe that we in Parliament have a duty to protect young people from this kind of pernicious and harmful indoctrination. As a result of what is going on, a recent poll carried out by NOP Research revealed that 59% of people thought that parents should have the right to withdraw their children from sex education lessons. And this at a time when responsible sex education in schools has been made vital by the rapid spread of AIDS. But who can blame them? My Lords, I trust that I have said enough to persuade anyone who is in any doubt that this bill is really necessary. If any noble lord has not seen the publications to which I refer and would like to glance at them before speaking, I have filched them out of the library and I've got them here, which would save any noble lord a journey to the library at this stage. The third leader in today's Times also puts it in a nutshell, and I've got copies of it too. My Lords, this is a small bill. It is a David of a bill which sets out to kill a Goliath of an evil. I wish it well. Decent people, parents all over the country, will wish it well too. As my noble friend has said, he has had a great many letters from people wishing it well. Do not let us disappoint them.
My Lords, I would like to welcome this bill. It is one thing to be tolerant of the sexual deviation of homosexuality. It is one thing not to discriminate against or to persecute those who indulge in the practice. The law on the matter is clear enough so far as I am concerned, and I am quite content that to let it stay as it is in that way. Our society has set the standards and so be it. My Lords, what to me is abhorrent is, and why I very strongly, vigorously support the bill, and a number of your lordships have expressed some surprise that I should be speaking on this particular subject. But it does have considerable local government connotations, and I want to refer to them. Above all, what particularly worries, troubles, and that is the mildest way I can think of putting it, me, is this whole business of accepting homosexuality as an alternative to heterosexuality. My lords, clearly this is a distortion of the worst kind, and is something which I think has now reached a point where it is time to say enough is enough. The thing has to stop. It cannot be allowed to go on as it is going on now, because the dissemination of this is spreading the whole of the time. My lords, I too will desist from a whole series of quotations from the many publications I have seen. The list is long indeed, but I would just like to refer to two only, which I think are very apposite. And one was from the London Evening Standard, very recently, the 10th of this month. And it was a cri de coeur from a priest who has vowed, he said, to fast from New Year's Day unless Haringey Council reverses its policy of positive classroom images of homosexuals. He goes on to say, and I think this in many ways sums up the depth of feeling which there is and the great concern which exists on this matter. The priest concerned, apparently a Mr. Rushworth Smith, said, Haringey Council want to equate homosexuality with heterosexuality. If they carry this through, they will destroy society as we know it. He goes on to say that Haringey parents, thousands of them, are from all creeds, are praying that in fact this policy be rejected. And yet we see in writing by that particular council the following words: we will oppose heterosexism in all its forms and will work to ensure that lesbians and gay men have an equal position in society. Local councils need to take a public stand of opposition to heterosexism as promoting one sexuality as the superior one. And the only other quotation I wish to read, my lords, is this. And it is from the Gay Liberation Front manifesto, and it says, we, along with the women's movement, must fight for something more than reform. We must aim at the abolition of the family. The end of the family will benefit all women and gay people. My lords, I wonder if everyone knows that in the London boroughs of Islington and Lambeth, the word family is proscribed. It is not permitted to be used. The term to be used is social unit. You might say, have we all gone mad? Where do we actually draw a line? My lords, I was impressed by what the noble Lord Longford had to say. I was really impressed by him. Knowing his particular views, I thought he made a responsible contribution. But the most important thing he said was his concern too for the family. My lords, there are two other aspects which I want to cover also in a speech which must not be too long. I don't think this subject or the bill calls for that. But to me, my lords, this is the tip of the iceberg. I am concerned so much about the image of local government. Again and again we hear expressed by authorities, those who claim that they are most short of funds to provide services at the levels they wish to do. Their word cuts has become engraved apparently on the hearts of all of them. And there is sympathy for things which they cannot do with funds if they don't have them. But my lords, how can they possibly equate the spending of money on this kind of thing, on this kind of propagation of the employment of people at many thousands of pounds a year, and not one or two of them, but many of them? How can they equate that with the need to provide services, good housing, housing repairs, social services and others for all the people. My lords, when I was elected to office as a council, I was told, and I tried throughout all the years to carry out, the fact that we represented everyone in the ward, whether they voted for us or not, whatever were their beliefs. And that put upon us a special duty to be concerned about the spending of every penny, that it go to where it would do best. My lords, can anyone say in local government, especially in areas where there is deprivation, that this is the best way to spend much needed money? And I am not talking about protection of rights. I am talking about spending money to propagate this kind of belief. My lords, that was my first point for local government, when we talk of what kind of a priority is it. And the other point, and isn't it strange that it was the point that the noble Earl referred to as being the objection of the Right Reverend Primate, when he said that his concern was a move towards more centrism, taking of more powers away from local government to the centre. But my lords, if you look at the history of what has happened in recent years, again and again local government has protested and objected because this power and that power has been taken from them. But what do they expect if they conduct themselves in this way, if they so abuse the system which is set up, as my noble friend Lord Campbell reminded us, by statute? My lords, it is no good complaining if you set out to defeat the government at Westminster on its mandated policies. It is no good complaining if you tolerate this kind of behaviour. And the fact is that the local authority associations, which were always so proud of their at least outwardly professed neutrality, why haven't they done something to at least speak out against that which we are assured, and which I accept without question is not the policy of the Labour Party or any other party? I accept that without hesitation. But then today these associations in the main are controlled by Labour authorities, and they must speak up, because the damage which this is doing to the reputation of local government is intolerable to those of us who want to see local government not be something that we joke about and that is held in contempt and in fear by parents. We want to protect the image and not see it go back further, as this kind of thing is allowing it to do. So they will have to speak up, and they will have to stop this kind of nonsense, because, my lords, that is all that it really is. My lords, I promise not a long speech. I so applaud the initiative and the courage of the noble Earl in bringing this forward. It is a sensitive subject. So often one tends to shy away from this because you know that extraneous factors will be introduced as reasons why one should not do this. I hope that the government, in fact, will give this bill a fair wind, that will give time for it in both houses, or if they wish to take it over themselves, that they will do so. I'm sure the noble Earl would have no complaint as to that. But that it is needed is surely something that no one in your lordship's house would argue with. That the fear of thousands and millions of parents and children, the fear that this will be imposed upon them as a teaching, is fatuous nonsense. It must be stopped. There must be action taken, and I am very pleased indeed to support this bill.
My lords, I'm very glad to follow the noble Lord Bellwin, who's just spoken. And like him, I am particularly grateful to the noble Earl Lord Halsbury and to the noble Lord Campbell of Alloway. And I warmly support this bill. My lords, homosexuality is clearly not what God intended for human beings. And therefore I deplore any attempt to promote it by public money as an acceptable family relationship. And I deplore it even more if public money is used to indoctrinate children in this way. I warmly support this bill and hope that it will get a second reading today.
My lords, I wish to give this bill the strongest possible support for two reasons. First, because of that urgent necessity to put a stop to the use of public money to promote teaching and other policies in our schools which are causing grave offence to many parents and to members of the public. And secondly, because of the harassment and the intimidation meted out to those parents who have tried to protect their children's interests. My lords, I, like other noble lords have spoken, have no criticism of teaching which increases tolerance and understanding in human relationships, and which would reduce the likelihood of victimization of homosexual groups or individuals. Indeed, I would welcome such teaching. But what is happening here is fundamentally different. It is different in philosophy and in its policies, espoused under so-called positive images, and much of what is being promoted in the name of so-called anti-sexism. My lords, here the balance has swung to the active promotion of positive images of homosexuality and outright attacks on the concept of the normality of heterosexuality. My lords, this policy takes many forms and absorbs huge sums of money. For example, the costs for the Haringey proposals for the gay and lesbian unit do or could involve expenditure of the order of magnitude of £250,000 in an area where there is plenty of social deprivation and no shortage of problems which could benefit from such resources. But, my lords, it is important to realise that although the parents of Haringey have hit the headlines with their very courageous stance, as you can read about in the Leader in today's Times, these developments are taking place not only in Haringey, but also in other parts of London and in other parts of the country. I was speaking to teachers in Manchester on Saturday and assured that similar policies are being pursued in parts of the north of England. And this should not surprise us. A book called Tackling Heterosexism, brought out by 9 London boroughs, recommends that in a London education authority and other local education authorities should, and I quote, put resources into developing materials and changing curricula, effectively to challenge heterosexism in lessons at all stages in the education system, from primary school up to colleges of further education, and that a variety of materials be developed, for example, videos for use in lessons, which would raise issues of heterosexism and present lesbians in a positive light. I continue quoting that heterosexism awareness training courses should be introduced as a compulsory part of in-service training and during teacher training programs, and that those who do not pass such courses in places like Brent are to be debarred from sitting on appointments panels. And the implications, of course, of this for future appointments are self-evident, that successful candidates in the future will have to be ideologically correct and have appropriate sexual attitudes. My lords, one of the most deeply disturbing features of this whole positive images policy is the kind of teaching material and the sorts of books that are being recommended, which are available in teachers' resource units and in children's sections of public libraries. One, which has already been referred to by some of your noble lords, called The Playbook for Kids About Sex, is written for very young children. Another book, which is recommended or mentioned in Ilia's publications and is available in the children's section of Haringey Library, is called The Milkman's on His Way. And I will not shock your lordships with quotations from it, but it describes in very explicit detail intercourse between a 16-year-old boy and his adult male homosexual lover. My lords, it is material like this which is causing enormous offence and concern to parents and to members of the public. I would urge your lordships to look at it. The noble lady, Lady Saltoun, has offered to make some of her material available. I will willingly do the same, because I think it explains why parents are so very upset. It will also help to explain why in places like Haringey, children as young as 4 or 5 are going home from school, talking to their parents and asking whether their friends are gay or lesbian. My lords, I have mentioned the parents of Haringey, and I wish briefly to return to their experience, because it is instructive for 2 reasons. First, because they have been subjected to gross intimidation in ways which are totally unacceptable. Yeah. When they have attended council meetings, they have been harassed, spat upon, had eggs thrown at them, and have even been urinated upon. They have been denied the right to put their views. After one meeting, they were followed home, and during the night, their cars were vandalized. They have received numerous abusive phone calls, including death threats, and I think that most ominous of all kinds of death threats to their children. They have been told that the callers know where their children are at school, and they will get their children. My lords, this is going on in our own country, in our own city here. Surely we owe it to these parents to give them some protection for the stand they are taking to try to have their children educated in ways which do not violate their deepest religious and moral convictions. When one mother told a councillor that she was claiming the religious freedom which she thought was her right in this country, she was told by him that people have died for their religion, and perhaps she should too. Other parents have been told that their children are not their own, and they have no rights as parents. They were told by a member of the Gay and Lesbian Subcommittee that parents do not know what is in the best interests of their children, but we do. Surely, my lords, the time has come when we must make provision for these and other parents to have education for their children in accordance with their religious convictions, and also give them some protection for their own physical safety. And I must just add that it is not only Christian parents who are deeply concerned. Many Muslim and other parents are equally worried and active in protest. And indeed, the Parents' Rights Group in Haringey have obtained over 5,000 signatures on petitions saying no to homosexual lessons from nursery schools upwards. And it is because of the kind of brutal intimidation to which these parents have been subjected that this bill is also necessary. And we cannot just rely on the government's proposals, good although they are in principle, to depend on increasing parental representation on governing bodies to defy these evils. In areas such as Haringey or Brent, LEAs will just ride roughshod over them. I'm happy to say, my lords, that support has been forthcoming from some of the local religious leaders, though by no means all. And I must say I'm rather sad to see that no Right Reverend Prelate is speaking or has put down a name to speak in this debate. However, a Baptist minister in the area near Haringey has held a special service for prayer on these matters and has pledged, as one of the noble lords has already said, that he will begin a strategic fast on January the 1st, which he will continue either until the council changes its policy or is itself changed. My lords, I do hope that this bill will receive support, as indeed it already has done from speakers, from all parts of your lordship's house. And I therefore do not wish to make any party political points. But it is necessary to understand that there is a political dimension which we cannot ignore, and that is the involvement of the hardline far left in local government and also in local politicised branches of the National Union of Teachers. At the council meetings where there has been such violence, there is a forest of banners and placards, including those of the Revolutionary Communist Party, the Socialist Workers' Party, and in Haringey, the Haringey branch of the NUT. Neil Kinnock has only in the last few days asked these far-left dominated councils if they will desist from these policies which are causing such aggravation. But they have refused to give any such undertaking. As quoted in the Times on Monday, Miss Bellos, leader of Lambeth Council, said, and I quote, "If you mean Are we going to backpedal on positive policies? As far as Lambeth is concerned, certainly not. That again, my lords, is further indication for the need for this protective legislation. My lords, as I conclude, I have tried to show that the situation is not only necessary, serious, but also urgent. I therefore hope that we will support this bill. But just before I sit down, I'm afraid I have one very minor reservation I must put on record concerning the wording. I have discussed this with the noble Lord Earl Halsbury and my noble friend Lord Campbell of Alloway, and we have agreed that it would be the best policy to identify this problem now and ask perhaps that the committee in another place might consider how to rectify it. I refer to the words, I quote, as an acceptable family relationship in lines 9 to 10. I am worried because they make the bill, it seems to me, both too wide and too narrow. They imply that promoting promiscuous homosexuality might be acceptable, and they also might be taken as derogatory of stable homosexual relationships where partners live together discreetly for many years. And I would suggest that perhaps it might be preferable if those few words were deleted or some other amendment on those lines. Yeah. But I must emphasize that I hope that this reservation will not delay the passage of this bill through your lordship's house, as it needs to go through with maximum speed if it is to become law in time to protect parents and their children. My lord, as I sit down, I must just emphasize that those who are living in our inner city areas, like Haringey, Brent, inner London, and also those in leafier suburbs such as Ealing, are desperate. Their children are trapped in an education system from which they have no escape. Their children are being subjected to policies which violate their parents' most fundamental religious beliefs and moral values, and in which, not only to quote Yeats's phrase, the ceremony of innocence is drowned, but where they may be exposed to influences which could be seriously, psychologically destabilizing, and where their parents are suffering brutal intimidation. I hope your lordships will agree to give them the protection which this bill can afford.
Could I just say that the material to which he referred isn't mine. It was placed in the library by the noble Earl Lord Halsbury, and I will put it back there immediately after the debate.
My lords, it's a pleasure to follow the noble Baroness, and I found myself in agreement with almost everything she said. I do find it very remarkable that she, like one or two other noble lords, found the contents of these children's books unsuitable for quoting in the very broad-minded atmosphere of your lordship's house, when we remember that these books are actually designed for 5-year-olds. And that is a point that we should remember. My lords, I rise to express my grateful support to the noble Earl for this bill, speaking as a private individual, although I speak from these benches. I feel perfectly free to do so because I believe this should not be thought of as a political matter, even though the authorities against whom it is directed are dominated by representatives of the extreme left of my party. And also because they are extremists, I feel no disloyalty whatever, any more than my noble friend Lord Longford, in speaking against policies of theirs when they are by no means official Labour policies and when I totally condemn them. My lords, the extremism of these policies has already been emphasized by one noble lord after another. They seek to put homosexualism not merely on an equal basis with heterosexualism, as several noble lords have suggested, but as superior to it. My Lord, I don't intend to go into any further details about the disadvantages of homosexuality because they have already been mentioned with great force by many noble lords. The particular point I wish to make is that the rationale of these policies, if rationale there be, seems to be that homosexuality is necessarily innate. It is there at the time of birth. In the case of all who are destined to become fully fledged committed homosexuals in their adult lives. And that therefore in all cases, in all such cases, any such proclivity should be discovered, then nurtured and increased. It is as though it were intended not to multiply the number of committed homosexuals, which is what would be achieved, but to diminish the number of repressed homosexuals who are taken as being condemned at present to a life of unfulfilled misery through trying to live a heterosexual life when their natural true desire, inevitable because innate, is supposed to be quite otherwise. My Lords, I hold strongly that this is not in fact the case. My Lords, a hereditary peer can hardly dispute the importance of heredity. But in many matters, I believe, environment is of more importance still. There may indeed be some, I'm sure there are, the nature of whose genes predisposes them at birth towards homosexuality. But far more important, I believe, are the influences brought to bear on them between their early childhood, or their birth, as Freud would have us believe, and their eventual maturity. My Lords, I may say that this belief of mine is strongly supported by my own personal experiences, in which I have no intention of going, when I was at Eton in the 1930s. And the part played by the public schools has also been alluded to by my noble friend Lord Longford. My Lords, I have no doubt that these policies will greatly increase the number who become practicing homosexuals, though they were genetically perfectly capable of leading happy, fulfilled, heterosexual lives if their influences in childhood had been different. My Lords, I emphasize happy and fulfilled because I am not talking about morality. If a person is a committed homosexual, so be it. I accept it and am quite unconcerned. But, my Lords, I have a son who has just turned 5. I also have a grandson who's a teenager. My 5-year-old son will enter a state primary school in January. Now, above all, I want his life to be happy and fulfilled. My Lords, if we lived in Brent or Haringey, have no doubt that we would move away. No matter what cost, inconvenience and disruption might be involved for Sean's sake. But others, my Lords, cannot afford to do so, however much they would like to. My Lords, this bill may not be perfect, though I note the strong opinions expressed that it is a model of draftsmanship. Cannot do any harm. I believe it will do much good. I strongly support it.
My Lords, I too would most wholeheartedly support this bill. First, I would deal with the necessity of it in point of law, because at the moment the local authorities are given an almost much too wide a discretion in the way that they deal with their funds. It's given under Section 137 of the Local Government Act 1971, which says they may contribute their funds to the funds of any body which provides any public service in the United Kingdom otherwise than for the purposes of gain. And then by our latest amendment in 1986, it can be done by, they can give money to a voluntary organisation whose activities are carried on otherwise than for profit. That is the width of the discretion which is given to the local authorities in respect of their funds and the way they use them. Lords, the difficulty at the moment is to be able to challenge the way they do it in a court of law. We've had recent decisions on the procedure of judicial review which say that the courts are not to interfere with that discretion of the local authorities unless they exceed their powers altogether or do something which is totally absurd. My Lords, it would be very difficult at the moment to challenge the way in which they're distributing their funds for these homosexual purposes. My Lords, what is intended, I'm glad to see subparagraphs 2 and 3 of this proposed section. You have a procedure, we can draw it up from the past, where any person affected who is sufficiently interested, whether it's a parent or whoever it may be, or a ratepayer, can go to the courts. He uses the word justiciable here, but I don't mind which it is used. He can go to the courts and ask for a declaration that the local authority are misusing their funds, they're applying them as they should not be if they're applying them as for homosexuality. Act for a declaration and for an injunction to stop them using their funds in any such way. So, my Lord, if this bill passes, it will give a remedy, an immediate remedy, to stop local authorities using their funds, if I may say so, for homosexual purposes. And that is the objective of the bill, which I hope everyone will support. Now, my Lords, just a little on the more general matters. On the law for this, or perhaps on religion first, I just did look up the book of Genesis again. But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. And the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. And when I read that article in the Times this morning, I thought of altering those words and saying, but the councillors of the borough of Haringey were gay and corrupted the children of the borough exceedingly. And I would like to add on, after this bill, the Lord destroyed those councillors. My Lords, that's the religious aspect. May I say a word on the legal aspect of homosexuality? For all the common law, as long as its existence, the law condemned the abominable offence of buggery. I've tried many cases, adults and the like, and sentenced them 3, 4, 5 years imprisonment for that offence. Sir John Wolfenden, we all knew his report, all followed it. It didn't legalize it at all. It only said, over 21, in private, no longer a criminal offence. Oh, but the Lord still preserves, I hope, and protects our youngsters. Against a child under 16, there can be imprisonment for life. And let me tell you, the influence which these books which we've seen can have on youngsters. It was the Wolfenden report. They took a lot of medical evidence, and I'd like to read one paragraph of Sir John Wolfenden's report. Our medical witnesses were unanimously of the view that the main sexual pattern is laid down in the early years of life, and the majority of them held that it was usually fixed in main outline by the age of 16. So there it is. Influence of youngsters under 16 may make them or mar them for the rest of their lives. And then we see them being made or marred by these booklets and publicities which are distributed at the hands of the local council in the schools. Are we going to let our young be corrupted in this way? Lord, we need this bill. Of course, it's not under only 16, that's for life imprisonment. Still, it's unlawful, criminal, under 21. Still, we do not allow it in our armed forces, the army or the navy. We know it destroys discipline and the like. We must not allow this cult of homosexuality, this making of it equal with heterosexuality. We must not allow it to develop in our land. We must preserve our moral and spiritual values which have come down the centuries. And one way we can do it, and I would support it altogether, is by passing this bill as speedily as we can. And I would like to accept Lady Cox's lamentation. I don't see any need for the words as an acceptable family relationship. They shouldn't indulge in any or give any funds for the purpose of publishing or promoting homosexuality. And Lord, this bill, I hope it will pass speedily into law, because it will deal with the present evil which has been brought into our society.
My lords, may I also join other noble lords in welcoming this bill brought forward by the noble Lord Halsbury. My lord, it seems very strange to me that in society today, where we spend a great deal of money and time trying to prevent physical and mental disability, whereas some of our schools, they're promoting sexual disability. There's no doubt in my mind that homosexuals and lesbians are disabled sexually. It has nothing to do with their physical ability, it is to do with the whole aspect of sex. And Lord, in addition, as other noble lords have mentioned, it is offensive to practices of Christianity, but not only to those who practice the main religion of this country, but to those who practice many other religions. Highly offensive. And it will, as the noble Lord Longford said, lead to the ultimate breakdown of family life, upon which the whole tenor of this country and its ways have been formed for generations, and upon which the whole civilized world has been formed and based. My Lords, it's getting late, and so I'm not going to say any more except to say that I note from the order paper that we have an almost deafening silence from the benches in front of me. I do hope that the noble prelate will feel able to support the bill, even if only in a few words. My Lord, I do hope the House will give this bill a second reading.
My Lords, perhaps mine will be the only voice in the debate that is not in favour of giving this bill a second reading. And I want to begin at the outset by saying that I do not stand here with any brief either for homosexuality or for lesbianism. I fully share all of the criticisms that have been made about the behaviour of some councils or some councillors in pursuing what they believe to be their duty to their ratepayers and their citizens. I listened very carefully indeed, and have read very carefully indeed, the words of the bill. And I must confess that I am somewhat confused. We are told that there are no politics in this bill, and yet the noble Earl who began the debate said the loony left is hardening up the lesbian camp. And when we begin a debate on a serious topic like this by a person who has my great respect and sets the tone for the debate, then I think it's very, very sad indeed. The topic deserves to be treated far more seriously than that. And then the noble Baroness Cox told us that there were no politics in this, but she then felt constrained to proceed to tell us that there were politics in it of a certain kind. The other puzzle I have got is precisely what the movers of the bill want. If what the movers of the bill want is to stop harassment, is to stop, as Baroness Cox said, fair-minded people with great worry in their heart being urinated upon and spat upon and eggs thrown at them, then I will be, if not the first, I would be alongside her to deplore that anyone suffers that kind of behaviour anywhere. It has to be condemned. It has, of course, to be validated. But when it's validated, I would certainly condemn it too. We are told, of course, that this is but the tip of an iceberg. I was very pleased indeed to listen to the noble Lord Campbell of Alloway. He began by saying that the bill is not designed to harm or harass homosexuals. And then we've heard various phrases which certainly to me, if not designed to harm or harass, certainly indicate an attitude of mind towards them. And then I look with great care as to whether there are halfway houses in this or not. The bill seeks to prohibit the promotion, and we've had the promotion defined as the discussion of, the teaching of, the mere presence in schools of the topic of homosexuality. If indeed there are those who have come along here to support that it shall not be discussed, that it shall not be argued about, that it shall not be left to the individual children and their parents to form a view, then I very much depart from them. What in actual fact, by all means.
Only very quickly to take the point. Nobody is saying that promotion meant what the noble Lord has just said it meant. It's the promotion of, quotes, the positive images as a matter of policy. I'm grateful to the noble Lord for giving way.
I'm grateful to the noble Lord. He asks the question and poses others. Almost every person in this room will have their different views. of what the positive promotion is. It's a debatable subject. I simply remind the House that under Section 8.5 of the Education Act 1980, it requires local education authorities or school governors to inform parents of the manner and context in which education about sexual matters is to be given in schools. And the authority, the department, has just published a booklet, Health Education, from 5 to 16, and it invites comments by the end of this year. It contains a section on sex education, including the treatment of homosexuality. And this is what it says. Given the openness with which homosexuality is treated in society now, it is almost bound to arise as an issue in one area or another of a school's curriculum. Information about and discussion of homosexuality, whether it involves a whole class or individual, needs to acknowledge that experiencing strong feelings of attraction to members of the same sex is a phase passed through by many young people. But for a significant number of people, these feelings persist into adult life. Therefore, it needs to be dealt with objectively and seriously. That is what the booklet published by this Secretary of State for observation by the public has said. And what, in fact, I am arguing about is there is a grave danger, if this amendment is passed, that it will seek to repress the honest and open discussion of these matters at a time when, in my view, they ought to be discussed seriously and sensibly in our schools as never before. Criticism has been made about authorities, and in particular about ILIA. Let me simply tell the House that in seeking to fulfil its obligations, it has published a booklet, The Teaching of Controversial Issues in Schools. This is the advice, regardless of how that advice may have been interpreted in some authorities. Controversial issues cannot and should not be excluded from the curriculum in schools. They will arise spontaneously from pupils' interests, experience and questions, and they will have a proper place in planned courses of study. It recommends that teachers select controversial issues in a way that is appropriate to the age, maturity and cultural background of the pupils. Handle these issues in the classroom in a professional manner by adopting procedures appropriate for balanced teaching and learning. And there's a great deal more written sensibly. I've looked through the booklet, other than quoting individuals like Sir Keith Joseph, who gave very frank views to the teaching authority on how they should teach another controversial issue, and that was the question of the nuclear issue. The booklet is unexceptional. Now, I have not had the opportunity in detail of reading some of the booklets that have been pleaded in aid here in this debate. I don't deny what has been said they contain, and I would abhor what it is said they contain as well as anyone else. But in my view, my lords, I believe that this is not a helpful bill. I believe that it does not promote what in fact we ought to have at the moment, and that is a greater understanding of the sexual orientation of everyone who lives in our society. I believe that it would have the effect of repressing discussion in schools and hampering the development of organisations who are designed to assist. Let me conclude by simply saying this, that if anyone here believes with responsibility on this side of the House that the image of either the Labour Party or of Labour in local government is aided and assisted by the performance or behaviour of some individuals or collectively in certain parts of the country is to the aid of the Labour Party, then I simply say to them, then they are not correct. As far as the Labour Party is concerned, we are anxious to ensure that every individual is entitled to be treated with respect and to have their views respected too. I very much hope that when we hear what the Minister has to say, he will sympathise with the situation in which a great many people find themselves, but share my view that a bill of this kind is not the way to proceed.
My Lords, I support this bill and press Her Majesty's Government to give serious and positive consideration to it. And I thank the noble Earl, Lord Halsbury, for bringing this bill before your Lordship's house. May I say to the noble Lord, Lord Graham of Edmonton, that I speak from no political motive. I speak for the sake of children. My Lords, I accept that there are circumstances which lead to two men or two women living together in a lasting and stable relationship. What one cannot accept is promiscuity, bitterness, and instability in those relationships. But, my Lords, what is not acceptable is the aggressive promotion and teaching in our schools and in our community of homosexuality as a way of life in our society. And I wonder whether I may say to Lord Graham of Edmonton that I agree with him that, of course, knowledge and understanding of different ways of life is one thing, but the promotion of homosexuality as a way of life is another. And there well may be books which follow the first line, which is to give knowledge and sensitivity to different ways of living in our society. But, my Lords, if the noble Lord, Lord Graham of Edmonton, were to read all the books that we have read, I think that he might feel very differently about some of the teaching that is going on in our schools. My Lords, the noble Baroness Fox spoke of young children. May I speak of adolescent boys and girls who more often than not go through a phase of experiencing deep feelings for older people of their own sex. It is a phase, if it is encouraged, if it is taught to be a way of life, there are some, and I say only some, who will not pass out of that stage, but will remain homosexuals and follow the homosexual way of life to their lasting unhappiness. My second point deals with happiness and stability in our society. Children, while growing up, need the experience of living alongside a father and a mother who are in a stable relationship. Through this relationship between husband and wife, children learn to relate both to the world of men and the world of women. And in this way, children learn to aspire to a stable marriage with children which provides them with happiness and fulfillment. My Lords, I would suggest that research, particularly that of the National Children's Bureau in the national cohort, and experience show us that a stable, happy family life provides for most people a way of happiness and self-fulfillment. Conversely, there are many and only people who suffered in their childhood. There are many in our prisons, and I have visited many prisons where the prisoners have said to me, if I had had a stable, normal, happy life, I might not be here today. Giving financial or other assistance for the promotion of publishing and promoting homosexuality, my Lords, homosexuality, or for the purpose indeed of teaching homosexuality, deprives both children and adults of a way of life which betokens happiness and stability, but undermines the concept of family life.
My Lords, it is rarely I intervene in debates in this House or on legislation which does not affect my homeland of Ireland or Northern Ireland. However, I feel so strongly on this issue that I feel compelled to stand up in the House today and to give my full support to this bill and to the way it has been introduced by its sponsor, Lord Halsbury. For other reasons, I am compelled now to live in Great Britain. I cannot live in Northern Ireland. My family, to a great extent, have moved to this country with me. My daughters and my sons and granddaughters. My sons and granddaughters are now attending schools in this country. And I hope that what we are debating here today will make it less likely that they will be brought under the influence of the councils who are propagating homosexuality. At present, this propagation is restricted to a few schools, mostly within London. But if these councils are given free rein, and free rein means that you are afraid to stand up to them, you are frightened of them. Some people may be frightened that they may lose votes at local government level. Some people may feel that they would lose votes if they supported this bill. They may lose votes at parliamentary level. If those people have a conscience, then I can only say that on an issue such as this, I would be prepared to lose my deposit in a parliamentary election. I have absolutely no doubt as I listen to my radio every morning, whether it be Radio 1 or 2 or Radio 4, and hear the appeals that are being made now in relation to the terrible scourge of AIDS that is now affecting this country. And I have absolutely no doubt that a very, very significant number of the present AIDS carriers within our society were given positive education in homosexuality when they were at school. I believe that this is a very necessary bill, and I'm quite prepared for the fiercest criticism from the so-called libertarians within this country and those who propagate homosexuality and lesbianism. We will be told that we are a non-elected House and we shouldn't be in a position of dictating the morals or otherwise of people within this country. I believe that this House has a duty, elected or not. I believe that the House of Commons has a duty as well. And I want to see this legislation being put on the statute book. I only wish that we could guarantee in this House this afternoon a very full attendance. And then those in support of this bill go into the lobby, and those who oppose this bill, I will say this from my noble friend Lord Graham, he has shown some courage here in the House this afternoon. I believe that that courage is misdirected. But I would like to see a full vote of this House and a full vote of the other place to determine on what way society is going to go and what way society will be judged in the future in this country. I am speaking here from a purely personal position, from a position of conscience, and most of all, I'm concerned about the society in which my grandsons and granddaughters are going to be brought up in this country.
My Lords, my noble friend Lord Fitt has said that he is speaking from a personal point of view. Well, this is a private member's bill, and we are all speaking from a personal point of view. And I must make it clear at once that although I'm speaking from the front bench, I am not expressing the views of the party. But I do think I'm speaking for a great many people on our front bench when I would say that we are very sympathetic with the aims of the noble Earl's bill, that we do not want to promote homosexuality. And I think it is a much more complicated matter, though, perhaps, than his bill would suggest. And I would like to go a little into a few details about that. The noble Baroness Lady Faithfull I think has raised some of the problems, and nobody really as yet has mentioned very much about the wording of the bill, except the noble Baroness Lady Cox, and I would just like to go into a few details about that. I would like to make it clear that I, and I'm sure a great many of my noble friends, would condemn a lot of the things we've heard about this afternoon. But I would say, and I would like to quote from the HMI document Health Education from 5 to 16, that the discussion of homosexuality in schools is, I think, important. And I would just like to, and I understand also that the Secretary of State has supported this as well as the HMI. And if I may quote from Health Education from 5 to 16, given the openness with which homosexuality is treated in society now, it is almost bound to arise as an issue in one area or another of a school's curriculum. Information about and discussion of homosexuality, whether it involves a whole class or an individual, needs to acknowledge that experiences strong feelings of attraction to members of the same sex is a phase passed through by many young people, but that for a significant number of people these feelings persist into adult life. Therefore, it needs to be dealt with objectively and seriously, bearing in mind that, while there has been a marked shift away from the general condemnation of homosexuality, many individuals and groups within society hold sincerely to the view that it is morally objectionable. This is difficult territory for teachers to traverse, and for some schools to accept that homosexuality may be a normal feature of relationships would be a breach of the religious faith upon which they are founded. Consequently, LEAs, voluntary bodies, governors, heads and senior staff in schools have important responsibilities in devising guidance and supporting teachers in dealing with this sensitive issue. I think we also have to remember that, of course, a certain number of children may be affected if they are, in fact, living with one parent who may be living also with someone with whom he or she has a homosexual relationship. And we have to, I think, to remember these children when we are considering what we do about this bill. Just to have a word on the wording of the bill, it inhibits local authorities from giving financial or other assistance to any person for the purpose of publishing or promoting homosexuality as an acceptable family relationship, and this is what the noble Baroness Lady Cox referred to. On the face of it, this doesn't appear to inhibit local authorities from themselves publishing or promoting homosexuality. It would clearly prohibit funding of voluntary organisations with such aims, but it's not clear that authorities themselves could not issue such publicity themselves, e.g. through lesbian and gay units. To put it at its weakest, the wording is sufficiently ambiguous to cause difficulties, particularly if it read in conjunction with the Local Government Act 1986, section 2, which states quite categorically in 2 subsection 3, a local authority shall not give financial or other assistance to a person for the publication of material which the authority are prohibited by this section from publishing themselves. And then it also says, or for the purpose of teaching such acceptability in any maintained school. Again, the issue is whether a local education authority is itself teaching such acceptability or giving assistance to other people, and only the latter appears to be prohibited. Advertising for and appointing, say, an advisor on gay rights for schools would probably be caught by this, but it doesn't seem to cover teaching staff already in post, teaching part of the normal curriculum, which may well include homosexuality as an acceptable family relationship. This bill would restrict local authorities in buying material from other bodies, if their purpose was the promotion of homosexuality as an acceptable family relationship, because this would be giving those other bodies financial assistance. If the above argument is correct, then authorities could continue to promote outside material already purchased. On the question of who can institute proceedings, the bill as drafted is not entirely clear, but it does refer to any person having a sufficient interest, which is probably somewhat wider than any ratepayer,
I hope that the government, when responding to the bill, will deal with the points which I've raised here. The bill, of course, is intended to curb the amount of work that's being carried out by local authorities on gay and lesbian issues. And I do think it's right to mention, as my noble friend Lord Longford mentioned in, I thought, his extremely sensible and sensitive speech, that there is a national, that this bill should be introduced at the time when there's a national awareness campaign sponsored by the government on AIDS. And yes, it's been workers in voluntary organisations, for instance, the Terence Higgins Trust, who've been providing most of the information up to now. Their work could be affected by this bill. I would like just to say a word about what the Right Reverend Prelate, the Archbishop of York, said about not supporting the bill because it takes away from the powers of local government and puts more powers into central government, as somebody who has repeatedly made the complaint that this government is taking many more powers to itself. I think I would like to say a word in support of what he has apparently written about this bill. Well, my lords, I hope I've said enough to show that I support the aims of the bill, but I think it is a very much more complicated issue than the bill than would appear, and indeed from what has been said by many of the speakers today. So I shall listen with very great interest to what the noble Baroness has to say in reply.
My lords, I hope no one in your lordship's house will think me patronising when I start the government's response to noble Earl Lord Halsbury's bill by saying that he brings great credit to this house by bringing before us a most important subject which is much in the public mind at the moment. It's extremely disturbing to see some of the material which is published or made available by local authorities, and I should like to endorse the aims underlying the proposals in the bill and the tenor of today's debate. My lords, we've come a long way since the pre-1967 days of sexual persecution. Homosexuality in private between those over 21 who consent is now legal. However, my lords, that does not mean either that it should be encouraged or that it should be publicised, both of which, as we've heard today, do go on. The government believes unequivocally that to promote homosexuality as a normal way of life to anyone, let alone children, is to go too far and to create the serious risk of undermining those normal family relationships which are the very fabric of our society. There is no doubt, in my mind at least, that this is the effect of some council spending of their ratepayers' money. Some would say, my lords, that it is the reason for it, and it makes even my simple mind wonder if this is not in fact the truth. The Banquo's ghost haunting this debate has been the connection with AIDS. If local authorities wish to distance themselves in the public mind from charges of encouraging the spread of this disease, would they not be better advised to target any money that they wish to make available to the essential task of ensuring that accurate and effective information is available about how to avoid the further spread of AIDS? It is worthy of note, my lords, that however odious, damaging or misplaced the funding of gay and lesbian clubs may be, or however distasteful a particular sexual proclivity, this bill does not attempt to prevent local authorities or local education authorities from pursuing these activities. That, as the noble Earl Lord Halsbury has made clear, is not what this bill is about, not in the vernacular, where we're at. And my lords, I'm not sure that certain sections of the media, and indeed one or two of your lordships today, have got that particular point. This bill, my lords, seeks to add a new section to Part 2 of the Local Government Act 1986, a part which, as has been pointed out, is concerned with the regulation of local authority publicity. Section 2 of the Act prevents a local authority from publishing any material which in whole or in part appears to be designed to affect public support for a political party. But quite clearly, my lords, that provision does not assist with preventing the type of publicity about which this bill is concerned, since such publicity is not designed to favour the fortunes of a political party. Equally clearly, provisions to stop local authorities promoting homosexuality do not sit easily alongside the existing party political prohibition. I cannot envisage, even when looking on the black side, that homosexuality will ever be a party political issue in the sense of that section. Section 3 of the 86 Act goes on to make it clear that local authorities may publish information under their general powers only on matters relating to their statutory functions. My lords, it is by no means clear to me that local authorities are empowered to promote homosexuality in their publicity, as opposed to providing some forms of information. Their discretionary powers in Section 137 of the 1972 Local Government Act have, as many of your lordships are aware, been used for a number of bizarre activities, and local authorities are at present entitled to publish information about those activities under Section 142 of the Act. They may not use Section 137 to promote bizarre ideas, since we have already stopped that use of Section 137 for persuasive publicity campaigns and other promotional publicity in the 86 Act. The government is actively considering whether further limitations need to be put on the use of Section 137 in the context of our consultation on the Widdicombe report, which is due to be completed at the end of the year. Section 4 of the 86 Act, though, is relevant and could be of direct assistance to the noble Earl's objectives. This section enables my right honourable friend to issue a code of recommended practice as regards matters such as the content, style, distribution and cost of local authority publicity. We believe it right, in the highly sensitive area of publicity at ratepayers' expense, to have such a code, to highlight factors that may lead to bad practice, and to require local authorities to take account of certain principles in deciding whether to incur expenditure on publicity or not. Insofar as local authority publicity expresses particular views on matters only tangential to their functions, or is controversial and sensitive, it will be covered by the principles to be set out in the Code of Practice. A draft code is currently being prepared for consultation with the local authority associations. The code will in due course be placed before your Lordship's House for approval. Your Lordships may well think, with me, that this code should contain clear principles to be observed on the questions which we are debating today. I have said, my Lords, that we believe it right to require local authorities to give due weight to these principles. The House will remember that in this House we did not accept the government's advice to this effect. The government has made clear its intention to bring forward legislation to strengthen the legal status of that code later this session. I very much hope that the House will bear in mind the importance of the provisions of the Code of Practice when we come to debate those legislative proposals in the new year. My Lords, turning now to the second part of the prohibition, we are all agreed that the most dangerous and pernicious effects of a loosening sexual values are on children. Schools must approach the difficult task of teaching their pupils about sexual matters in a responsible and sensitive manner. We must ensure that children are not subject to insidious propaganda for homosexuality. Moreover, the physical and emotional dangers of promiscuity should be spelt out. Regrettably, there have been instances, we have heard some referred to in this debate, of the use of unsound teaching methods and materials and the propagation of extreme and unrepresentative views of sexual ethics and mores, in the main related to the presentation of homosexuality. The bill seeks to make this illegal by prohibiting financial or other assistance being made available by local authorities for this purpose. And, my Lords, it refers to a very subjective word, namely acceptability. a word which could occupy your lordships, sitting in your judicial capacity, for hour after hour. Be that as it may, my lords, the government is firmly committed to the provision of appropriate sex education in schools, and equally to the need for effective action to prevent irresponsible and inappropriate teaching in this field. We debated these important issues at some length earlier this year during the passage of what is now the Education No. 2 Act, 1986. Not least because of the deep concern amongst parents, Parliament has just approved a change in the law on sex education through the new Education Act to prevent such abuses and to ensure that parents' wishes are given due weight and respect by schools. Under the new arrangements, all those responsible for the provision of sex education in county voluntary and maintained schools will be required by law to ensure that any teaching offered is set within a clear moral context and is supportive of family life. Full control over the content and organisation of sex education will be placed in the hands of the new style school governing bodies which the Act establishes. These have increased parental representation and are answerable to an annual meeting of parents. Parents will thus be able to influence directly the sex education which their children receive, both through their elected representatives on the governing body and through making their views known at the parents' meeting. As part of their new responsibilities for the content of sex education, governors will be able to see any books and other teaching materials which teachers intend to use in this field and to decide for themselves whether they are suitable for classroom use or not. I am confident that no governing body, given the strong influence of parents, would permit inappropriate and unbalanced materials to be used. It is surely preferable to concentrate, as the government has done, on ensuring that unsuitable materials never reach the classroom, rather than to look for redress and recourse to the courts after the damage has been done. My lords, these are significant changes which demonstrate the seriousness with which the government views this issue. My lords, my noble friend Lady Cox, acting in concert with the noble Viscount Lord Buckmaster and the noble Earl Lord Halsbury himself, do not know their own power. My lords, I am advised that the Secretary of State is empowered under the bill and through the Education Act of 1944 that the Secretary of State would not allow any such interference in the democratic process and in the arrangements which he has introduced for parent power, which will be paramount. Should an authority be found to be acting in breach of the new provisions of the Act, I am certain that the Secretary of State would bring the full force of his powers to bear on the authority concerned. What all this means, my lords, is that the noble Earl's bill seeks to prevent local education authorities from encouraging the promotion of homosexuality in schools at the very time that those same authorities are about to cease to have a direct role in determining the kind of sex education to be offered in schools. My lords, my noble friend Lady Cox made the point that books of the nature that we've been discussing this afternoon in public libraries need also to be caught. But, my lords, in public libraries, which are covered under different Acts of Parliament, different considerations apply. Putting a book on a library shelf is not, repeat, not, promoting the views in that book. I have no doubt that the House will want to go into this particular subject in some depth in committee. Finally, my lords, on this aspect of the bill, I should express reservations about how the wording of the bill, with its prohibition of the promotion of homosexuality as an acceptable family relationship, might be interpreted in practice. The House will want to investigate, again in committee, whether the meaning is clear or whether there is a risk that any teaching about homosexuality will effectively be outlawed. the government's policy is that schools should be prepared to address the issue of homosexuality, provided they approach it in a balanced and factual manner, appropriate to the maturity of the pupils concerned. The issue cannot be ignored by schools when it is widely discussed in society and when pupils may well ask questions about it. We must also recognise, my lords, the role which schools have in informing their pupils of the threat to health posed by AIDS. Questions about homosexuality are very likely to be raised by pupils in this context, and they must be dealt with. As the government's public education campaign about AIDS makes clear, ignorance is the greatest ally of this terrible disease. The government has made quite clear that any teaching about homosexuality must never, in any sense, advocate or encourage it as a normal form of relationship. To do so would be educationally and morally indefensible. I appreciate that the Noble Earl's Bill seeks to prevent only such abuses. I fear, however, that the distinction between these and what I have described as proper teaching about homosexuality cannot be drawn sufficiently clearly in legislation to avoid harmful misinterpretation. That is a risk, my lords, we cannot take. In these circumstances, in the government's view, the bill is unnecessary. I am confident that the provisions of the new Education Act will prove fully effective in safeguarding pupils from the kind of undesirable and extremist influence about which your lordships have heard today. They must be given a chance to prove their effectiveness. To support this part of the Noble Earl's Bill will be to cast doubt on, and indeed to undermine, the provision of the new Education Act before they have even come into effect. My lords, that really cannot be a sensible way of proceeding. To summarise, my lords, I cannot emphasise enough that the government have every sympathy with the aims underlying the proposals in this bill. We are quite convinced that the promotion of homosexuality as an acceptable way of life reflects a misguided and possibly dangerous view, particularly where young minds are concerned. We do, however, question the need for and the appropriateness of the proposals set out in the bill. Educationally, we've already taken steps to put the responsibility where it belongs in the hands of the parents. On publicity, we have made an important start with the Local Government Act, 1986, which we will ourselves seek to amend and strengthen this session. The proposed code of practice covering local authority publicity will be particularly helpful in achieving the Noble Earl's aims if its legal status can be strengthened. A section dealing with the matters we've been discussing today, included in that code, would be a far better way of proceeding. I do not want to debate the merits of various trigger clauses with the noble Lord Campbell, my noble friend Lord Campbell, today, but I hope my point is clear. My lords, the fact that the government's stance is one of neutrality in a bill of this sort does not, as I have sought to explain, mean that it is negative. My lords, I close as I opened by saying that the government do not disagree with the Noble Earl on the aims, but solely with the means.
My lords, may I commence my winding up by thanking all speakers, particularly for the very wide variety of the aspects they highlighted. There was so much unanimity that I won't go through everything everybody said and try and summarise it. I would, however, like to refer to one matter which my old friend, the Noble Earl of Longford, mentioned, and where there was some misunderstanding about it, I think, by the Noble Earl Lord Graham of Edmonton. Schoolboy homosexuality starts as post-pubertal curiosity. I discussed it with my parents before I ever went to a public school. I discussed it with my outgoing headmaster of my prep school. I discussed it again with my tutor at Eton. As an older boy, a captain of the house, I was expected to collaborate with my headmaster and housemaster in discouraging it wherever I could. And why was I always warned against it? Simply because I was warned that a habit once started may become a permanency and can only lead to unhappiness in later life. Now, the noble Lord Graham of Edmonton seems to think that discussion of sex in schools is something new. It's not at all new. In my life, it's gone on all my life, and I had discussions with my children about it and so on, and they had discussions with their pastors and masters and so on. We're not talking about discussion here at all. We're talking about encouragement, and there I'm glad to know that the noble Lord Skelmersdale is with me on that. Now, in the Wolfenden report, he specified that people's sexual orientation was not fixed on leaving school, that they needed a close period of several years so that those of them who may have had homosexual experiences at school had, as it were, some free time to shake loose from it if they weren't, in fact, permanently orientated that way. And I have been told by psychologists that it's only at about the age of 24 that a person's sexual orientation is finally fixed. Therefore, the question of orientating them in the wrong direction for a very long period, up to the age of 24, is very wrong indeed. It may lead to total unhappiness in later life. Now, my lords, I really don't think, although another point made by Lord Graham of Edmonton, I think he sees Hansard tomorrow. I said that I was warned that the loony left was hardening up the lesbians. I didn't make the positive statement that it was, so I wasn't myself introducing politics into this subject. My lords, I don't think really I can withdraw a bill that's had so much support in this House. And if there is opposition to it, then I must express myself content and take the matter to a division. It's quite right, my lords, that a minority should stand up and be counted. But there's something a minority can do, which is to stand up and not be counted by failing to appoint tellers. And that's happened once today. Now, I must remind your lordships that if those who express themselves not content that this bill should go to second reading fail to appoint tellers, it is in order for any member of your lordship's house on either side who has not spoken in the debate to go to the table and appoint themselves tellers for the other side as volunteers, because it is quite wrong, I think, to stand up and not be counted. We must know what the force of argument is here, remembering always that I've not only had immense support in your lordship's house, I've had immense support in correspondence from all over the country, and a very good press. My lords, I beg to move.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time. As many as that opinion will say content. Yes. On the contrary, not content. The contents have it.
My lords, it's been agreed through the usual channels that the statement which is to be made in another place on the airborne early warning